Amazing. What a great interview. Discussion.
Absolutely.
I genuinely knew none of that.
No, that was really an interesting conversation to have. As the listeners will find out here in a few minutes when we go into the show, there's so much that happens in movies that you don't think about the music part of it, right? It just adds that something to the movie. And if you were to take the music away, it completely changes the context of the movie. It's something that I could never do, but I love the movie soundtracks and what it does for the film. So to hear a process of how you go about to create it, it doesn't seem as daunting, right? Like she's kind of just like you or I, you sit down with an idea and you just sort of figure it out. And, 6 to 8 hours later, you've got something.
Yeah. And that
right?
the whole conversation about how that process works, when they get involved, what stage is the film in by then, I found that really interesting. So as you say, they'll find out in a minute.
And every project is different. It depends.
It depends.
It depends. I think that's an appropriate comment. As much as that appeared in the interview, it all really does depend. There's so many variables, and especially when you're putting, your art into somebody else's art, there's so many things that can happen and so many avenues you can go down. And you might find yourself going down a particular road and then the director says, yeah, no, that's not what we were thinking here. Hopefully they give you some direction into, getting back on the right path, and maybe sometimes not. Maybe it's just, well, no, this isn't working. Come up with something else.
Yeah.
It's messy, but art is messy.
Art is messy.
And if there's just a formula,
it can be painful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It can be absolutely painful, especially with that sort of fear of rejection or that possibility of rejection, because it is your baby, and to see it cut, that's got to be rough. But anyway, let's get on with the show.
Let's get into
Absolutely.
Hi, and welcome to Sound Discussion. Each episode, we discuss a music topic which we have all had first-hand experience with. These will be anything from getting started, recording, playing live, mixing, mastering, and everything in between. Most episodes, we will have a special guest to bring their professional experience to the discussion. So, let's get started.
This month, we are thrilled to be joined by a composer, multi-instrumentalist, and storyteller who weaves together unique soundscapes for film, TV, and games. Classically trained, they furthered their musical studies by studying the avant-garde styles of musique concrète and electroacoustic. With projects spanning across platforms and genres, they bring a distinct and evocative approach to composition that truly amplifies the emotional core of each story they work on. They have scored projects for Amazon Prime, and their music has been used across the BBC TV network and played on BBC Radio. On top of that, their work has been mixed in major UK studios, such as Warner Brothers Delane Lee and Twickenham Film Studios. You will have heard their music in indie films, video games, or even podcasts just like this one. Please welcome to the podcast, Joanna Karselis. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Joe. Great to have you. It's so good. We love having guests on. We love talking to people about stuff that we know nothing about. So brace yourself for the we know nothing about this. Because as we point out every episode, we are still winging this, no matter how many years we've been doing it. I'm sure you're probably the same.
I think that's generally the attitude for all musicians, isn't it? If you know everything, then you're doing it wrong.
Yes,
definitely.
That is appropriate advice, actually. Yeah.
Just dropping the pearls of wisdom early,
Bam. How did you get started? Either in music or in what you're doing currently?
Well, music has always been a really big part of my life. My mum studied piano professionally and played. So she definitely had a lot of music going on in the house. Classical music was always around. But when I was about 4 years old, I remember sitting in nursery, kindergarten, I guess, for you guys. and someone brought a violin in, and I was sitting on that carpet and being like, what is this sound? What is that? That's what I want to do with my life. So I ended up spending my whole teenage years like a massive geek, just sitting in orchestras, playing, practicing. That was my life, you know. I got to university, decided I wanted to study violin at university. That was the goal. And I got there and they told me I wasn't very good, actually, despite having spent my whole teenage years studying it. They went, no, you're not great. Maybe switch to viola, actually, if you want to play professionally, which was a bit of a shock to the system at the time. But a few weeks later, I was in a lecture kind of going, what am I going to do with my life? You know, I've spent all this time studying violin and now I've been told I'm rubbish. Oh, no. And they played a piece of music by a composer called John Adams called Harmonium, Negative Love, so classical music. And it just blew my mind that music could sound like that. I had never heard anything like it. These kind of huge waves of instrumental colour coming and crashing over us. And I just changed my life. So from that moment on, I was like, that is what I want to do. I want to make music that feels like that inside.
Wow.
So I kind of, I've gone from there, really. I kind of stumbled into film music a few years later after my master's. But that was really the point of me becoming a composer rather than a performer, I guess.
Wow. That's really interesting. And boy, your story sounds very similar to mine coming up, because I started playing violin when I was 3.
Oh, cool.
So like around kindergarten, right?
Beat you by a year,
yeah. Although I guess you could say that I started learning the concepts at about 3. I don't think I started playing until I was about 4. You know, let's be real here. What 3-year-old can play the violin? But yeah, I've been studying it. You know, I had been studying it my entire life. And then I got to college. I played in orchestras in high school and middle school. I did the whole thing year over year over year. And I get to college. And of course, I'm a violin performance major. That's my goal, right? And I've been doing orchestras my entire life. Here we go, college orchestra. Holy shit, that's a different level of playing. Like, I was not prepared for that. And after one semester, I didn't have anyone tell me that I wasn't good. I didn't need anyone to tell me that I wasn't good. I knew I wasn't good because I sat in the back of the orchestra and I said, I'm not very good at this, so I'm going to go do something else. So I dropped my violin and put it aside and went on, you know, and did some other things. But I picked it back up about 15 years ago now. And I enjoy it more than I ever did growing up. So, you know, don't let anyone ever tell you that you're not good at something. So
that's so cool to hear that you had such a similar story in so many ways there. And I think that's a really good point. We come back to things later in life after we've lost the love of them professionally, possibly, and we find more enjoyment and more pleasure in playing them for ourselves in our own ways, right, than we ever did.
Right.
Probably sitting in an orchestra. There's something really special about singing in an orchestra and performing. I don't know if you'd agree, but for me, it's very unique. But there's also something different about coming to it for yourself and just playing for yourself without that pressure. Really freeing.
Totally. Absolutely. There's a lot of pressure when you're playing in a group like that, because you might think you can hide, you know, but you can't. And, you know, if you're not playing in lockstep with everyone else and doing the parts correctly, it is, you stick out like a sore thumb, and it is humiliating and embarrassing and torturous. I have massive respect for people that play in orchestras professionally, because it is not easy.
Absolutely not.
And it takes dedication, and that's something that I just didn't have at that age. And yeah. Anyway, sorry, not to derail your story, but I had to jump in with that because it was like, that is my story.
Yeah, you're right. It's so much pressure, isn't it? I had a nightmare once about doing the bowing wrong in Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet, like genuinely waking up in sweats because I was so worried about messing up and letting down the whole orchestra, you know, like this stupid bowing passage. But so yeah, it's definitely a lot of pressure on young orchestral musicians. It's hard, and we don't talk about it. Yeah. Sorry, Ben.
Oh, I was going to say, I think orchestras are something that we should definitely cover in an episode, because when I was young, I played in youth orchestra, played drums for I was there a couple of years, and I think they are no matter what you want to do in music, if that's what you want to do, they are a unbelievably good foundation to start from. As a drummer, learning to read drum music, that's great. Learning when not to play, which is what you do in an orchestra more than when to play, sets you up with such an incredible foundation for how drums become musical instead of just rhythmic instruments. And I'm sure with violins, same. You've got parts where you don't play because there's no part written for there, and it's learning to just sit and not be involved is such a structured beginning for anyone who wants to learn music, whether they're going to write their own music or play in a pop band or just play covers at the pub. I think we should cover it as an episode at some point. That foundation
well,
an orchestra gives you.
And I'll see what I can.
I
find
played
out
trumpet in band.
And
I was also in the marching band.
Not dissimilar.
I was classical music, and we just didn't have the violins and the violas and any of the stringed instruments.
And you had to march while doing it.
Yeah, well, there was that too. I've been in band since like 4th grade, and then I in 9th grade we did marching band. So I was in sitting down, and then also marching, which is a completely
so you were in
different
symphonic band and then marching band. Okay.
Yeah, well, they called it band, but there was no strings. They had orchestra and they had band. And band was just, trumpets, flutes, clarinets, saxophones,
and brass instruments. Yeah.
And brass instruments. Yeah.
Is it easy to walk and play at the same time? Because I don't think I've got the hand-eye coordination for that.
That was hard. They actually had to, they teach you how to step so that you're not when you play, So, and also, man, holding up a trumpet, 10 degrees was the angle you had to have it at. And by the time by the end of the show, by the 3rd song, your arms hurt.
Imagine.
Trumpet isn't that heavy. I actually played with a cornet, so it was a little heavier. But it's not that heavy. But at the end of that show, that was heavy. Your arms. Oh man, I got to work out.
You should do an episode about how to walk and play. I'd listen to that. That sounds great.
All right, so you played in orchestra. You had this discovery, this epiphany of composing. You wanted to make this music that made you feel this way, which is an incredibly mature thing to identify at that age. So tell us about that process after you discovered you want to make that kind of music. Tell us about that process and finding your way into that world.
Yeah, well, it was a lot of learning very quickly. I'd gone in, same as you know, planning to be a violin major, so I kind of had to then realign my priorities. I still did major in violin performance practice, actually, romantic performance practice specifically, but I also kind of co-majored it with instrumental composition. So I ended up doing 3. I was lucky, the university I was at had a really comprehensive undergraduate scoring program and composition program, so I studied with some great composers for a few years about how to write for instruments and learn all those skills. And that was a really good process for me. I got to the end of my undergraduate and decided I hadn't learned enough. So I decided I was going to do a master's in electroacoustic and musique concrète music, as Neil described in my introduction there. It's weird hearing your website being read out loud. I'm not sure. Maybe you go back and reword some of that. So yeah, I went back and studied. And for those are 2 very obscure areas of contemporary classical music, which I should probably unpack a little bit. So electroacoustic music is computer music, and musique concrète is really related to it. It's this idea of making sound and music out of the everyday. So for example, one of the professors I studied with, is a very famous composer. He wrote a piece called Clang in the 60s, and that was for colander. And he sampled the colander and manipulated it using these very genre-specific techniques to create clang. So these kinds of techniques that really challenge how you hear the world, I think. It's kind of the transmutation of everyday objects into music, into sound. It's a French parlor tradition. It goes back to ancient Greek times. There's a whole load of stuff I won't bore you all with about it, but it's an interesting tradition and an interesting attitude to sound and music in general, I think. So I went on to study that, and particularly looking at how to combine it with instrumental textures and timbres. That was really my passion, like the timbre of a sound, like what does the sound feel like, as much as how the sound is constructed, if that makes sense, as much as kind of thinking about melody and all of the other components, like the actual texture is what really attracts me to a sound, probably from those roots. So yeah, I went and did that for a few years. And honestly, by the end of it, I was a little bit burnt out with classical music. I wasn't loving it at that point for a few different reasons. And I got the opportunity to score a play, my first theatre job. And that just, again, it's these kind of like Damascus Road kind of moments, where the light shines and you're like, this is what I meant to do. Because it was so different to anything I'd done before. It was a pretty much an all-female production team on that one, which made a big difference, I think. It was very collaborative. It was very open. I was able to kind of use all my weird geeky skills and put them together with the visual environment and with the performers and to collaborate. And it just blew my mind that I could write music for a play that would make such a big difference to the way people perceived it. The way the drama and the narrative were constructed really just made me go, that's what I want to do. That's it. And then a few weeks after that finished, actually, just out of the blue, I got lucky. I got so lucky. I got a message in my SoundCloud inbox, of all things, going, "Hi, I'm a director. Do you want to score my film?" That sounds very dodgy, doesn't it? But it turned out it turned out to be one of the most fortuitous things that ever happened to me. The film won loads of awards. It's on Prime now. It's still touring globally. It's probably one of the pieces of work I'm most proud of, actually, still. And that really kickstarted my film career and made me go, oh, wow, okay, so that experience I had in drama, I can do it with film as well. And more than that, it can go globally. People can find themselves in this story from around the world and it can relate to people all over the place. Like, how amazing is that? So that's how I kind of moved from classical into the more media world. Yeah.
Cool. So what's the name of the film?
Oh, it's called Reunification. It's about the reunification of China and Hong Kong and about the director's autobiographical experience. Can I say that again? Sorry. Autobiographical experiences with half his family remaining in Hong Kong and the other half going to America, to New York. So it's a very powerful piece of filmmaking about culture and identity and international family, really. Very, very proud of the film.
Very cool. Very cool.
Have to check that out. Absolutely. And
yeah, we'll post a link to that.
Yeah. If you email me a link, we'll put it in the show notes and all that sort of thing. I mean, it amazes me how many times we talk to people, whether it's yourself or Warren Hewitt or whoever it is, that just the most random things are the start of that journey. It's like everyone says, "Oh, what was your plan? What was your plan to get into this?" And and it's like the number of times it's like there's no plan. These things just they happen.
It just happens. Yeah. It's this sort of like crossing of chance and just putting yourself in the right position.
And a SoundCloud message.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Who'd have thought?
Who would have thought?
How much do you still find time to write for yourself? Because obviously you're a singer-songwriter as well. How do you find the balance between being able to work on things for yourself and being able to work on films or games and that kind of thing?
I mean, honestly, it's quite hard. I did 2 back-to-back features over the summer for the first time. I've never done back-to-backs before, and it was brutal. It was brutal. I mean, I barely had time to do anything but sit and write music for several months. I wrote something like 120 minutes of music in 12 weeks. That's not normal. And I would never do it again, frankly. But at that time, I had no artistic energy at all for anything for myself. But at the moment, I'm waiting for something to come in. So right now, I've got a bit of downtime, and that means that I'm able to get back to my album, something that I haven't had a chance to work on for several months at this point, and start to, find the power in that again. And that's exciting because it's kind of like one for that side of my career and then one for this side of my career. I can kind of balance it out with something that pays a day job, kind of, pays my rent, and then having the album, which I did get a record deal last year, but again, to be completely transparent, because I think it's important, I got a record deal. It was very exciting, and then the label went under last year, so now I've got a nearly finished album and no label. So it's kind of, you've got to find the balance in it all, haven't you, and kind of go, well, this will hopefully be something at some point, but right now I've got to kind of do it in my free time. And it's definitely a balancing act. You have to kind of juggle your priorities. You have to make space for things. I know that I like to carve out little pockets of time as and when I can. Even when things are really busy, I will try to find half an hour here or there as much as possible to do something just for me. Earlier today, I just spent 5 minutes making stupid noises on my Volca drum just because it was fun and I like the sounds. And maybe that'll become something useful and maybe it won't. But if we have these curious minds, I think we can find little pockets of creativity in the day, and that keeps it fresh between balancing all of the different demands on our time at any given moment, I think.
I really like that that idea of keeping a curious mind and allowing yourself to go there, because I know everybody has responsibilities and things that they need to get done, whether or not it's in music. But as a musician or as a music creative, let's say, allowing yourself that time to not have deadlines, to not have requirements, and just play with something and make some noise and appease that part of your brain, right? That, I like those sounds. Those are cool. That's doing something for me. Like, that's really important. And a lot of times as adults, we forget that, right? Like, I watch my kids play and I watch my daughter make noises with things, and she's just going after those noises that make her laugh and smile and giggle. And, it makes me smile because I'm like, I can't remember the last time I did that for myself, like sit down with my guitar and just play something, right? And just for the enjoyment, not because I need to, come up with something or record something or, anyway. Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind for anyone in this area, is to keep that creativity going and just allow yourself that time to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to not be too linear about what you call music as well. I keep a Tascam in my backpack at all times. So if I find a sound that I think is interesting, I can catch it. Sound is a fleeting thing. Music is a fleeting thing. And if we find a sound that interests us, we need to grab it,
I've done that many times with my phone. I'll be somewhere and I hear an ambient noise and I want to try and capture it, even though like I might listen to it later and say like, what the hell is this? And or B, it doesn't sound anything like it does in person, but just capturing that moment feels important and, the right thing to do.
It's your curiosity. It's your open-mindedness to sound and music interplaying and just not being too linear about what you call sound. That's really cool. I love that.
Yeah. No, that's very good.
What have you composed for video games, and what is the process for that? Because my thinking is like, I've always wondered that, because if you've got a character that's just standing around in a video game and you walk away, well, the music's still going. Is it on like a loop or something per scene? Or these are things that I think of when I'm playing a video game. It's like, oh, how's the music? Is it looped through? Does it end and does it restart? Is there specific scenes and stuff like that you're writing music for? Is it only for like cut scenes, or is it like for the actual, like, as the character's walking around?
That's a great question. I mean, yeah, characters, I think they have their own theme songs or their own sort of like
themes or melodies, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then that might change depending on their setting, and then what other characters come into this. Anyway, you take it.
Gosh, this is a lot of questions in a very short space of time. I'm not sure.
Sorry.
Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, okay, cool.
I'm sorry.
Easing me in. Right, okay, cool. I'll see what I can do. So game scoring. I've only done 2 games, so I can't speak on it with any kind of massive authority. 2 small indie games. It's not like I've done loads and loads of work in this sphere, but games audio is very different to how you would work in film, for sure. Yeah, so it's worth thinking about whether a media, whether it's film, game, or something else, is linear, so it can only be experienced in one direction, or non-linear, so interactive. You can experience it in multiple different ways, right? Game music is different because it's non-linear. Like you say, you can just leave a character standing there for 10 minutes, and what does the music do in that instance? Well, it changes, to be honest. Sometimes some games decide that they would have the music fade out, almost like they want to prompt the player to come back and interact, like, oh no, where did the music go? Sometimes they will just loop it. The way that music gets into games is quite different to how you put it into a film. You use what's called audio middleware. So the 2 most common ones are Fmod or WWise. And you use those to implement the music and the sound into the game together. So looping is a really big part of that. Yeah, you're not wrong. Absolutely, loops are important. But loops can get a bit boring. So there are other ways to kind of vary things within the loops. Like you might do a few different layers of, say, the melody where it changes slightly, like maybe the syncopation alters up, or you change a note here or there. The percussion loops, for example, you may just put a few extra beats in, or not, but you might do a little. Sorry, let me try that again. You might put some extra semiquavers in on one part on the MIDI if you're working with MIDI, or you might do a little drum break, or you might have layers that are able to come in and out and be muted at different points to add the variety. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can create interactive music that isn't stagnant, but it takes a bit of creativity, and you have to understand the software to implement it properly in order to be able to do it in a way that makes sense. So it's a really great way to compose, and I would really recommend anyone interested in it going away and learning F-Mod or W-Wise. Wise is my personal preference, but whichever works for you. Go away and learn it, because the way you compose changes from that point onwards. You start to think about how you construct your sounds differently, and you're in a different headspace. But it's a really interesting area to get into, and I'd really recommend checking out middleware if you're even vaguely interested in this area at all.
So you don't. So this is us really not knowing what we're talking about now. So you don't. I'm hearing from that you don't approach it in the same way as you do writing a song. It's not a I have a beginning, a middle, and an end, so to speak. In the typical verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, end. Is that right? It's more of a sort of journey piece, if that makes sense.
I think it really depends on the context and the kind of game. You may want something with a more simple kind of traditional song-like structure. You may want something which has a bunch of different moods. I was listening to some music from Final Fantasy yesterday, which has just all these different A, B, C, D, E, F, G sections, and then loops back to A and goes through them all again. So it really does depend on what you're wanting to do, and like what you're doing in the game at the point as well. If you're just, for example, in a safe environment, say a house, your home space in the game, you're probably more likely to find music that just loops and doesn't really change a huge amount. Whereas if you're in a battle scene, you may want to have that kind of more rigid structure. You may want to think about things like, how does the music interact with the sound design when the health bar goes low? When you get to a certain point in the battle, how is the music going to ramp up intensity to keep you going even further at that point? There's a whole load of extra considerations. So no, I don't think you can be particularly linear with how you approach the structure. You have to have that fluidity of composition and the ideas behind it in order to implement it in a way that keeps the player engaged and keeps the player experience really good, because ultimately that's the point of media music, right? It's to keep the audience in whatever context engaged in what they're doing. So you definitely have to approach it differently, whether it's a linear or non-linear environment, and differently within that at each given point as well. So you've got to have your brain switched on. You've got to be on it for sure.
Can I ask what video games you've done music for?
I've done one that's not come out yet, and I've done a very divisive game called Tower of Fate, a kind of rage-quitting horror game. We got people either loved it or they hated it.
Tower of Fate. Okay.
Yeah, very divisive game. It's done all right on the indie circuit, but the Steam reviews, they're good for my ego. Let's put it like that,
But you can be the biggest AAA gaming company in the world, and Steam reviews are never your friend. So you're in good company there. So how much engagement do you have, whether it's with film or games, with the director, the game producer? When do you get involved in that process? I think especially for me around films, I always wonder whether somebody's made the film and then they go, can you put some score around this, or whether you're involved in the set, as it goes along.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, again, I'm afraid the answer is it depends. So occasionally you get involved from script stage onwards, which is always like the best point to come in at, I think. You have such a long time to collaborate and to discuss things. You may even get some kind of input into how the film is made. We see some really great collaborations being made that way as well, whether it's Clint Mansell and his score for In the Earth, the whole thing being written before the film was shot, or Hilda Guðnadóttir recently doing the music for Joker. She pre-made all of the score for Joker, and then they were able to play it on set to get Joaquin Phoenix in the mood, and the bathroom dance scene, the most famous scene in the first Joker film, arguably, came out of the music that she'd written, and him just expressing himself to that. Like, how amazing is that she could feed into the film in that way? really, really exciting. I hear it was a bit of a nightmare afterwards from interviews with her because they had to go back and like re-edit all the music to actually fit the cut of the film, which sounds really difficult. But that's how they did it. But that's not normal. That's the ideal, I think, but it's not normal. What normally happens is, yeah, you're right, Ben, they shoot the film and they go, oh no, we haven't got any music on it. We better do something about that. Who's available? And that's when you normally get the call. And that's generally an 8 to 12 week turnaround time, sometimes quicker, sometimes a bit longer. And it's fine still, but it's not as relaxed as if you've been brought on earlier on and you can have the conversations, have the dialogue, get in the same kind of space as the director or the dev or whoever you're working with and collaborate for longer. It does vary, but the earlier the collaboration starts, the better. I guess that's true of all music, really, isn't it?
So with a larger film, might you be one of a few musicians or composers that are working on it, or do they generally go through you and then you might bring in other people to help contribute instruments and whatnot? How does that look?
There's normally only one lead composer. Sometimes people do decide to work together on a job. So sometimes you get two composers, but normally the lead composer is one person. Then under that, you may have additional music composers. You may have people who are kind of brought in to do orchestration, to do session musician work. The scale of it really depends on the job. So if you look at somebody like Lornbaugh, he often has 5 to 10 additional composers or assistants working for him. Hans Zimmer or someone is the same. A lot of composers at a certain level will have a team of between 2 and 5 to help them out. And how much those people have done on it is variable. You know, sometimes they might have done quite a bit, and sometimes they may have just written some synth patches or something like that. So I'm afraid, again, it does depend. It depends on the turnaround time. It depends on the budget. It depends on what is needed. The last horror film I've just been scoring, I don't think I could have had anybody helping me, really, because it's all such weird avant-garde sounds that I kind of just had to sit and make myself if I wanted them in the film. Whereas the film before, that was a fantasy film, and I got to hire a mixing engineer, John, who was on your podcast. He came and mixed the film for me. I had an orchestrator. I had a bunch of different session musicians to come and do the work. So yeah, it depends on budget, it depends on time, it depends on what the vision for the film is. It sounds very pretentious, but it does affect it. What do you want to do with it? So,
what's your preferred path? Working with others, or just sort of like buckling down and doing it yourself?
I mean, there are pros and cons to both. There are times where it would be handy to have an assistant to do a lot of the admin side of stuff, you know, setting up sessions and editing bits of takes and all that kind of thing. That's handy to have someone else to do. It's handy having an orchestrator. But equally, I've chosen not to go down the additional music path to this point because I like being my own boss. I like choosing my own jobs. I like being in charge of what I'm doing and having that direct collaboration with the orchestrator, with the director, and working with them myself rather than kind of being one of a team. For me, that's more fulfilling musically at the moment anyway. I also see people I know, people I went to uni with, for example, who have so many credits on so many great films as orchestrators, as additional composers. Can they get a gig on their own? No, they can't. So you kind of end up in this place where you're perpetually an assistant, perpetually writing additional music. There are people who have done an amazing job at kind of coming out of that environment. Gregson Williams and people like Benjamin Wolfish, thinking specifically about coming up through remote control and Hans Zimmer's situation there, and other composers as well. Many great composers have done it, but it's hard. I think you're in the rooms more, but you're used to being a particular mindset. You're seen as an assistant, so it's harder to break through. And for me, it was this choice of like, do I want to have a really great set of credits as an additional music composer, as an assistant, or do I want to have perhaps a slightly lower tier of credits at this point in my career than I could have done, but to have been the main mind behind it all, to have been the driving force behind it all? For me, up to this point, it's been, running with it myself and seeing what I can do under my own steam, I guess, in a way.
When you when you score for a film and it's an orchestra score, do you start with a particular instrument, or do you have the sounds in mind and you're writing just notes down? See, I've never written a score before, so is it Like, do you sit down at a piano, a keyboard, put the strings patch on?
I'm so sorry. The answer is it depends. Like, that's what I'm going to say to you guys. Like, there's so many different ways to do it. What I normally do when I start scoring a film is I make a mind map. So I get all the different parts of the film and I kind of write, this bit needs to sound yellow. What does yellow sound like? Okay. And this character needs to sound like this. Okay. How can I bring that out in their character? And then kind of connect it all together, join the dots and go, okay, that's the vision, right? And then after that, I might sit and I might make up some lines on my violin and record those and then go from there. I might sit at the piano. I might load up some string patches. It really depends on the sound of the film and what the turnaround time is as well, because if you have to work fast, then you probably need to be going straight into the DAW rather than at the piano. But if I'm trying to do something with more complex harmony or more lyrical writing, then yeah, I probably would go over to the piano and do it all pen and paper style and then come back and then come to the score later. I wouldn't generally start by writing dots on a page alone. I think it's really easy with media composition to be like, but this is my art. It's really pure. Let me get Sibelius out and do all my scoring very neatly, like a classical composer would. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you do have to bear in mind that you're at least partially scoring for MIDI, right? You're at least doing your mock-ups in MIDI, even if you're going on to do full orchestra afterwards. You do need to have a certain kind of understanding of orchestration and how to make the MIDI sound good so that the director will sign off on it. So you can go on to then do the orchestral session. So there needs to be a real awareness of what the technology is and what it does from the beginning of the scoring onwards. Doesn't mean you should compromise on your scoring, but it has to be a consideration, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So
totally.
When you're thinking of these, when you're sort of woodshedding these ideas and sort of coming up with sounds and noises, do you tend to reach for physical things that make noise, or are you working with VSTs and other, computer-based instruments?
My go-to is always organic sound.
Okay.
Because anybody can buy a sample library, right? Like everybody can have a VST. Only I have my violin. Only I have, not that long ago, I was playing my ironing board with a drum brush. Great sound. Only I have that drum brush and that ironing board and this acoustic. Cool. It gives an individuality to, yeah, well, why not? Why not? Gives an individuality to the sound. So yeah, even if you then go away and process them, I always like to start with an organic sound and at least go from that point, let the sound speak for itself and then process it into something else totally unique. Why not?
That's what I love about like upright pianos, like some old upright piano in the middle of a room. Don't know where that room is. They've recorded it. I love listening to Tori Amos too, because like sometimes she has like, you can hear the foot pedal.
Yeah.
In like that she's playing. If you listen closely on like maybe Bells for Her sound. Or some other. Yeah. And like she'll play on different pianos, and I don't know where these pianos are, but they just sound unique and amazing. And I love that. Just the uniqueness of it.
You're back to being curious again, aren't you? Like, what does this piano sound like when I play it here or there? And yeah, having that attitude is great. Love it.
I just love that anything can be an instrument, right? You wouldn't think that taking a drum brush and the back of an ironing board would produce anything useful, but in the right context, yeah, it could be just the thing, just the sound. I think that's really cool.
Do you know what I layered it with? I got my bin, I picked it up, I played it like a bongo, and then I got my airing rack and I got a conductor's baton, hit it on that, got a lovely like kind of triangle-ish sound, build all that together into a nice little beat. Job's a good one, It's great.
That's fantastic. That's really cool. I love that.
I'm the local neighborhood weirdo. I got out my drumsticks and a Tascam and some, mics and whatever, and record myself hitting tree trunks. Why not make a beat out of something that's that? And you can get sticks and hit them together. It's great. Rocks make great sounds. Trees make great sounds. Leaves make great sound. There's so much sound in the world. Don't limit yourself to VSTs.
But do make sure you've got some drumsticks in your hand, because that's the only way forward, people.
Basically, yeah, all of these stories are percussion based.
Yeah.
That and a double bass bow, that is great as well for just pulling on stuff. Great sounds.
Wow, that's cool. I'm going to go to the used instrument store and just buy old stuff and see what noises can come about from, $10 worth of whatever. That's cool.
Yeah, do it. Someone showed me a noise box they bought the other day. I really want to get one of those, with all the springs, just the bits of metal on them. But you can make your own really easily.
Yeah.
I love who's Les Claypool. He's got that. What do they call it? A wamola, where it's one bass string, and it looks like somebody just took a piece of stick, a big stick, and just put a bass string on it, and he's got one pickup on it, and he's got like a lever. And you hear it in the South Park intro.
Oh, really?
And he can control the pitch, and he plays it with a drumstick. Just very creative, very, very different. It's called a wamola, I think. WHAMOLA. Very interesting.
Did he create this instrument, or is this like
I'm not sure.
Established instrument? Wow, I'll have to look that up.
I've only seen him play it, so
he made it. He's made that himself.
He's probably made
that himself, but why not?
He's a bass genius, right? So like bass guitar genius, and it's in the South Park intro. So
yeah, we'll check that out. I love learning stuff on this podcast. Honestly, stuff we learn every week, every time we do one.
One of the most
No, go on. Go for it.
One of the most interesting composers working in media music at the moment is Daniel Pemberton, and he samples all kinds of stuff. So on the Into the Spider-Verse, he sampled Green Goblin screaming from an earlier film. On the most recent one, he sampled a goose, and then got DJ Blakey, the DJ from that, to scratch the goose cry. Like, how do you even think of that stuff? It's just amazing what you can do.
Yeah, like those guys that do sound effects for films, and they're taking wires and doing all sorts of crazy stuff to get the sound. I love watching that stuff. That I could watch that for hours.
There's a little I think it's called 60-second doc. I saw it on Facebook. It scrolled by, and it was this guy that has this horror film sound machine, and it's a box that has all these things. Yeah. Joe's shaking her head. Yeah, I think you've seen it.
Mark Warren,
yeah, and it's all those classic, just horror sounds from a horror film, and it's just coming from this box of just springs and strings and screws and just, oh my gosh, it is so cool how just a collection of things you can get from the hardware store essentially, and discarded instrument parts. I think it was like a violin string or a piano string that was strung across and stringing it, playing with a bow and hitting it with things. Like, it makes those sounds that when you're watching a film, you're not really thinking of those sounds, but they add to the tension of the scene, because without them, then it would be boring or it would take on a completely different feeling. I love how sound in a film doesn't necessarily have to be heard, but it just completely transforms what you're watching.
Yeah, it has to be felt, not heard a lot of the time, right. And that's the most important thing. And you're right, when you're working with sounds where you don't necessarily know the origin, particularly in horror cinema, that's a really important part of it. If as humans, we're drawn to what we know, right? Familiar sounds in our ears. If we're going to go, that's a violin, it's easier to not feel as scared. Whereas if you're kind of going, oh my gosh, what is that? You're unnerved, you don't know. And that's why people even do work with instruments like Bernard Herrmann's score for Psycho, for example. It's not a violin as you expect to hear it. It's not a violin as we know it, So even if you are working with traditional instruments, how can you manipulate them to create sound in a way that we don't expect? Because that's scary. If we can't place it, we're scared. Very effective.
You mentioned earlier that sometimes if the film's done, you might get 6-8 weeks to turn around. So this blows my mind slightly. So you scored the entire music for that film in 6 to 8 weeks?
When I have to, yeah, it does happen. It involves a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of organisation. And you have to know how many minutes a day you can do. And I was thinking about this earlier. It's I think it's a skill that you learn. I remember being an undergraduate, and it took me all term to write 5 minutes of music. Right, it was really hard. And I think the more you practice it, it's like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the more you can just do it. The more you can just drop and do it. I can write up to 10 minutes a day. I've done one day I did 40 minutes. I wouldn't recommend doing that to anybody. That was a horrific day. But I had to for the deadlines. So sometimes you can really pull it out of the bag. But 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the style as well. is possible for me now. I think normal is 3 to 5. That's like a normal kind of good day when there's no huge deadlines and you feel the weight of impending doom on your shoulders.
Boy, 40 minutes of music in one day?
It was an all-nighter, yeah.
Don't say how many hours did that take?
Many. It was bad, but, you know, sometimes with film music, deadlines are tight, you know? Sometimes you just have to pull it out of the bag and get on with it, and it wasn't pretty, but it got done. And it was weirdly actually not that bad, you know? I was quite happy with the music.
So I guess when you're really, you know, when you're under the gun, you have a deadline and you don't have time for second guessing yourself, how often do you just put something down and you take a glance at it? Okay, that'll work, and you move on? Or are you, you know, sort of like, as you're trying to walk to the next thing, you still got your neck craned over here and you're like, I'm not quite sure about what I just put down here, or how it translates to what I'm going into next. Like how often do you find yourself saying, yeah, great, this is cool, or it's not quite right? You know, because that second guessing can really derail yourself.
On an ideal timescale, it's not like you have to constantly be always pushing forward. You have got space to look backwards as well as forwards on when you're looking at the film overall. And that's a really important part of film scoring. You have to think about storytelling through music, right? You can't just start at the beginning, go through to the end and go, right, I'm done, that's that. When you get to the end, your ideas will almost certainly be different from where they were at the beginning. So you have to make time to go back and to change it. And a really important part of film scoring as well is getting notes from the director. So you write something, you send it off, and they give you feedback. I like to do that as I'm scoring, so we're kind of on the same page as we go, but sometimes they'll wait till you finish and then send them all in one go, which is less ideal, because then you've got to go back and change everything. And some ideas that you've maybe run with, you're then told, oh, stop running with them. That's not so good. So continual feedback is really helpful. But you've got to look forward, you've got to look backwards, you've got to look at what you're doing, and just be so aware of how all the music fits together and what you're doing throughout all of it, because it's really important to create this kind of holistic sound overview to the film. If you're not being cohesive about it, it won't make sense for the audience. You've got to think about how you're working with the sound designer as well, and be talking to them about what they're doing, what their ideas are. And looking backwards and forwards with them as well, and not be afraid to change it when you have to. So there's definitely got to be a kind of continual reflective process as you're going through, considering what you're doing and how it fits into everything else, and also the big picture things. Like, I often like to increase the tension of a film by raising the tonality by, say, a semitone for every cue. So you've got this sense of kind of moving upwards and tension building. Or maybe I'll even get the master track and put a pitch bend on it, but across like the whole hour of music or whatever. So you're not noticing it, but imperceptibly things are just rising and rising, and we're starting to kind of get out of being tuned to 440. It's starting to creep up. Just these little things you can do that are subtle but make sense in the big picture. Really, really important.
Oh, that's interesting. So you change even like not just 440, but you'll like increase the overall what do you call that? Tuning of everything?
Yeah.
Or that's interesting. That's interesting. Are you given and I know this is probably it depends answer.
You're getting to know me.
Hold on, let me guess what it depends.
It depends. Are you given from the director, well, you said you're given notes and you're given cues. Are you given anything visual to go off of, like the actual film itself, or a storyboard, or some sort of scratch? Well, we would call it a scratch track in audio, but scratch video to go work with? Yeah,
so when you're brought onto the project, it does make that depend. I was trying to avoid saying depend. I couldn't do it. It fluctuates depending on when you're brought into the project. There we go. Sometimes you'll be brought in from scripts and you're working from that, and maybe then there'll be prompts and that kind of thing the director gives you, whether visual or otherwise. Go away and watch this film, go into this album, that kind of thing. But often if you're being brought on when the film's already been shot, they'll have what's called a rough cut. So the film will be kind of vaguely assembled in the way it probably will look-ish towards the end of the film making process. You may get something called temp music, so temporary music put on the film already at that point. The editor often needs to have temp music to help them find the rhythm of the cut. So if you think about it as kind of filmmaking is a visual art, it does have a rhythm to it in order to drive it along, right? So music really helps with that. Temp music helps the editor with that. Personally, I find it quite annoying because you're watching the film, there's release music on there, and you're thinking, well, I can never be as good as Clint Mansell or Max Richter or whoever's been put on there. And, oh no, okay, this is a problem. So what often happens is you will also get a reference playlist now, which is my personal preference. I'd like to get a silent film and then a reference playlist, so the director goes, this is everything I want it to sound like. Please go away and listen to it. And from that, I kind of draw out what the director's trying to say. Often directors don't know anything about music. They don't necessarily have the language to be able to express what they want. So I try to talk to them in storytelling terms, like, how do you want us to feel? What's this character experiencing at this moment? What's their arc going to be? What do you want the audience to feel? Talk to them in character and story, because they know that. And then talk to them about, what do you like in this song? And then what they say, or this piece of music, and what they say often really then informs what you need to draw out from the reference playlist, whether it's a particular timbre or like a melodic idea or an instrument or whatever. And then you can run with that and work with that. So kind of that's the starting point. After that, you might begin working on the rough cut. I try to avoid it as much as possible because the timings will change. And the problem with film scoring is it is a logistical nightmare. So you need to make sure your timings are kind of...
I can imagine.
Yeah, you have no idea the amount of kind of bars of 116 in 78.154 I've written in my time, like just to make the beats hit the cut. It's such a pain. So I try not to start working until we kind of have at least what's called a fine cut, so a nearly finished version of the film. You normally sit down at this point as well and spot the film with the director, which just means you watch it together and you kind of go, I want the music to come in here and go out there. Probably needs to feel like this. It needs to reflect that part of this story and all these things. You might do that with the editor and the sound designer, maybe producer as well, music editor, depending on the project. So there'll be a few people in the room. And then you kind of, then you get started properly. And then the film is really finished when the final cut is done. You know that everything is locked into the picture in terms of the cuts, in terms of the edits, and you can hit your music accordingly. And that's really the ideal place to be starting. But increasingly these days with digital technology, that place isn't reached until quite far into the filmmaking process. So you generally have to start with the fine and be flexible till the final. But it's not an easy job.
One last little question. Have you ever written a piece for a film, like a section of a film, and you worked really hard on it, and you're really proud of it, and then the director cuts it, and then you're just like, oh.
Yeah, no, I wrote a really lovely cue for a film that's done quite well last year. It's won quite a lot of prizes now. I was so proud of this cue. I thought it was great. I sent the director like, nah, that's not what we want here. Okay.
What does he know?
I guess I'll just put that in the bin then.
Keep the rage within. Keep the rage within.
Yeah, it's one of my best bits of scoring, I think, but it will never see the light of day now. But that's okay, you've got to put your ego at the door. End of the day, like I say, you're a storyteller and you've got to do things that meet both the visual narrative and the director's vision, because they're the ultimate storyteller. Your job is just to assist them in telling that story. So
for things like that, can you use them for, say, your professional reel?
Possibly generally. In this particular case, no, because it was integrating the score with the source song. So if there's a song in the score, we call that source music. And I wrote some music that kind of transitioned from score into supporting this really lovely source song and kind of interweaving with it. And it was quite nice, I thought, but never mind.
But no, just no.
Yeah.
One time I watched a film I'd scored on Amazon, and they changed the music quite a lot, and that was quite frustrating, because you write it to sound one way, and then you go to watch it, and they've like muted stems at certain points and that kind of thing, and you're thinking, well, that's not how it was meant to be. Okay. You can't be too precious. You can't be like, my work, my opus has been destroyed. It's just not the industry. Right.
Yeah. So when you're composing to a film, composing a score, I imagine you have the film there, right? You're loading it up into your DAW so you can play along with it. Are you going from section to section, or are you kind of like start to finish or middle to finish? Like, what's your sort of process of well, I'm going to tackle this section first, or I'm going to do these 3 sections because they kind of go with each other, transitional wise. Where do you start? How do you break that up into manageable bits?
I'm going to sound like a broken record. I'm afraid that it depends. Yeah, it does. So we call the section. I'm so sorry, but it does. No. It's so variable. We call sections of music in film cues. So which cue you start with really does depend on the project. If there's like some big climax where I know we have to hit it right towards the end of the film, I'll start with that cue because that needs to be done. The fantasy I did earlier in the summer, we knew we had to build to this song at the end. So I needed to write the song first in order to then be able to use the melody throughout and to link back the ideas throughout. That had to be the first point.
So you're dropping, you have this big song, but then throughout the film leading up to it, you have all these sort of hints and sort of calls to that song. Yeah, okay, so that makes sense. Right, you got to start with the end and then work your way from the beginning. Yeah.
But then other times it makes more sense to start at the beginning and work through in a more linear fashion. It really does fluctuate. I do try to at least have some ideas before I start scoring. So I'll go away and write character themes, or I spend quite a lot of time sketching out harmonic palettes or textural palettes or whatever. So we know what the kind of raw materials are, I guess, that we're working with. This character's theme is going to be this, and this character will be linked with this, and then going from there. So you're not just going in completely blind at the start, like, oh, what am I going to do? Like, you have to have an overview, which is why the mind map thing helps. But no, beyond that, it depends. Sorry.
No, that's quite all right. Don't apologize for saying it depends. That's perfectly acceptable. What DAW are you using?
I use Reaper.
You use Reaper?
Wow.
Okay. I did not expect that. I was going to say Pro Tools.
Pro Tools? Well, oh, gosh, no.
So it's funny. We did the last podcast we did was all about DAWs and all of our journeys to where we are now. And the whole concept of that episode was they're all the same, aren't they? But they're not. But
they are.
And it was funny, but they are, but they're not. So Reaper, I find, so I was another person who used Reaper for a while, and I actually said to both these guys, it's not for me, because it's like a maths lesson when I'm doing music. Right, is how I felt about it. But for you, it absolutely works, right? I mean,
yeah,
does everything you want.
Absolutely, yeah. It's probably a hangover from my electroacoustic music concrete days. So it's pretty big in that scene. And it's big in game audio as well. Actually, these days as well, it's a real door of choice for game audio. So for me, it's just I grew up in Cubase and Nuendo, never really got into Logic. Reaper just fits my flow. It's just what I work in, and it just makes sense. But the best DAW is the one that right? Cristobal Tapia de Villa writes all the stuff for the White Lotus in Ableton. I can't figure out how to make a sound in Ableton, really. It's very confusing. What is that array window? No idea. So but if you can make it work, then it works. And for me, Reaper is not a maths lesson. It's my creative space. So
brilliant.
Well, that's wonderful.
And Ben, there's nothing wrong with a math lesson.
Well, I mean, first off, that's not true. There definitely is. But
yeah. No, me and Matt got in an argument in third grade. We haven't spoken since.
Yeah. Don't think we need to. The funny thing is that, Nate, when you were saying about starting with that big song at the end and then working back, we won't get her in, but if we brought my wife in, she'd say I'm such a geek, because I absolutely love it in films and TV where there's a motif that runs through. I literally sit there going, "Oh my god, that's the same motif that they used in the."
I love
such
that
a geek. I'm really sorry.
Having that common thread that goes through the movie, and it's not something that you realize is happening until you get to that big moment, and you're like, "It all makes sense."
It's
right?
very clever.
It brings the movie just sort of into clarity. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. I've got massive respect for people like you, Joe, who do that, because I just sit there and go, "Oh my god, that's so clever! That's brilliant. So clever."
I think you're giving us too much credit. It's just one of those. It's just like a skill that you learn. Like, I couldn't do what you guys do. It's a skill you learn. It's interesting that you guys like motif and kind of the threading of ideas like that so much. That's actually been a really controversial thing throughout cinematic history. Obviously, draws from opera and like Wagnerian traditions. But when people started first doing it in film, people like Aaron Copland and these really famous people called Hans Eisler and Theodor Adorno wrote a whole book about like how it was terrible and diluting classical music and shouldn't be done. And now we just take it for absolute granted that it's something that we do and it adds this clarity. But originally people thought it was, like the end of the world, the kind of ending of classical
Really?
purity. Yeah.
But I feel like it absolutely connects the film to the music.
Yeah.
You'll watch Star Wars and a different character will come on and you'll hear their theme in the background, and then you'll hear their theme in a different way, depending on the scene.
Sure.
John Williams, everything that guy touches.
He hasn't written much, though. I mean,
Yeah, he's an amateur.
what does he do?
Nah.
Yeah.
I know.
How old is he
Everything.
now?
Everything. That's what he's
He's
written.
still scoring.
Yeah.
He's like in his 80s. He's still scoring.
I think he's 92 or
he's
93 now, actually. He's still going.
Wow.
He's got a new documentary coming out, music by John Williams, which I'm looking forward to seeing. So.
That'll be long. That's what that documentary will be.
Looks quite star-studded, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I saw a
Like the
preview
films
for
that he has
yeah.
touched, you take away the music, those films are not as good.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Mhm.
So we've understood now that you use Reaper, which is interesting. These are the new. We've got a couple of questions we're now asking all guests. One of them is, which DAW do you use? Very interesting. The other one is, outside of built-in EQ and compression, do you have one plugin that you just use all the time? It's your go-to. It could be a VST instrument. It could be a soundscape, a
Right.
reverb, anything.
Can I give you a set of plugins that I don't think anybody's ever really heard of?
Definitely.
Okay. So again, coming from my weird electroacoustic music concrete background, we use these plugins a lot by, I'm not going to try and say it, but it's the group's Research Musicale in France, in Paris. And say that bit in a French accent, please, in your heads, guys. So the GRM plugins are absolutely unique. I've not come across anything like them. And they are such good ways for processing sounds in really unusual patterns. And then you layer them into these really fascinating ways of approaching sound that I've not found replicated in any other VSTs. So those are the ones that I use all the time to make sound, to generate sound. And I use those to build my own sound libraries that I then can draw on for my own projects. I've got my own huge database at this point of sounds that I've made using them. The kind of sound linked, but they're not fully, they just create something wonderful and amazing that I think a lot of people are missing out on. So the GRM plugins as a whole, everything that they do, definitely worth checking out.
Huh.
Fascinating.
That's
Nice.
cool. I'll check that out.
Definitely, yeah. We're looking those up and again putting them in the show links in the show notes, because that's I love that. I love it when people go, "Oh, can I tell you about something not many people know about?" It's like, no.
Absolutely.
Oh no, wait, yes, absolutely.
Drop the
you
knowledge
can.
on us, please.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, the other
wonderful.
answer is all things sound toys, right? But,
Yeah, well, that is,
Yeah.
yes. I
worst kept secret in audio.
have
So.
Yeah.
a half dozen plugins from Sound Toys that live in my template. They don't ever leave. Yeah.
What is life without sound toys, really?
Oh my gosh. No, that was when I first started, and that was my very first third-party plugin set that I bought. I just went and bought the whole damn thing because I knew that they made those plugins in a way that really spoke with me and how they operate and how they manipulate sound. So that was my very first set of third-party plugins that I purchased when I got started, and
So
I've had it ever since.
I've heard of Sound Toys. Is it VST only or?
No, they're regular plugins. So they're VST3,
'Cause-
AAX. I think they make AU. Yeah, I'm
AU
pretty sure
as
they
well.
make
Yeah,
AU.
you can get
right.
more.
So
Yeah.
when I was with Pro Tools, I couldn't do any VSTs. It was always AU.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was, AU or
Was it
whatever.
AU? Those early days?
AAX wasn't it for Pro Tools?
AAX was later, I think, but AU
Yeah.
or something like
Yeah.
that. There was some prior.
They had their proprietary something or
That's
other.
what it was. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the word.
I've got all the Sound Toy stuff like everybody else has. Filter Freak, I've no idea what that does. I mean, I've literally loaded it up and I've looked at it
I love
and gone,
Filter Freak.
I don't know
I love that.
I don't know what any of the buttons do. I mean, I've literally got no
Well,
clue.
now there's something to be said about some of these Sound Toy plugins, such as Filter Freak, in that, yes, I agree with you. I don't know what all the buttons do. You find a good preset and you can kind of get a general idea. But I learned this trick from Jack Antonoff, and he was talking about using Filter Freak to just sort of do a gentle slope on the low pass and high pass areas. And you could do the same thing with an EQ, but there's something about the way Filter Freak does it. It adds a little analog character to the slopes, and makes it sound natural, but not muffled or cut in any kind of way. But he uses it on vocals to take the sort of high frequency sort of sound of a condenser microphone, especially in modern production these days, and just shave off that high filter or high frequency and bring the vocals back a little bit so they're not right in front of your face, but they're still just dead center in the stereo image. And I've tried that, Ben, on some of the songs I've sent you recently. I do that on the vocal, and boy, does it works beautifully. So I don't know. Snake Oil, Jack Antonoff did it first, so I tried it and it worked really well. So there you go. There's a tip for you.
That's so cool. I'm going to try it tomorrow.
There you
I won't be opening Filter Freak because it's too complicated.
But I love that, Nate. Again, like, even though you've heard it from somebody else, like, you're being curious with the plugin. You're not using it as you're meant to use it. Brilliant. It turns out great.
Right. Yeah, it does something that an EQ probably does, but this works just as well, and it sounds a little bit better, and I'm going to go with it. If it won Jack Antonoff a bunch of Grammys, then damn it.
It'll win you a Grammy too.
It'll win me a Grammy as well.
Exactly. Well, look, Joe, I'm aware that it's rocking on for 20 to 10 at night here in the UK. So, it's time's marching on. This has been absolutely brilliant. I've learned so much about something I knew absolutely nothing about to start with. So,
a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your generosity of your time tonight.
Well, no problem. Thank you for having me. It's been lovely to talk to you guys and to hear about your work and to ramble on extensively about my nerdery. Thank you so much.
We all have our own nerdery. That's the best bit about it. We are all nerds.
Absolutely. We are all nerds. Absolutely.
Good. Like-minded people. That's great.
Yeah, brilliant. Look, thanks, Joe. We'd love to have you back on at some point. We say that to all our guests, but it's always true. Really love talking to you. So, have a good rest of your evening, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much, guys. Have a lovely evening. And
brilliant. Cheers, Joe.
Bye.
See ya. Thank you for listening to Sound Discussion. Your hosts are Ben Holmes, Neil Merchant, and me, Nate Kelms. Our theme song is composed and recorded by Jojo Timmerman. You can find us on the internet at sounddiscussionpodcast.com, or you can drop us a line at sounddiscussionpodcast@gmail.com. Additional show notes for this episode can be found on our website or in the description area of your podcast player. A big thank you to our guest for taking the time to chat with us today, and to you, the listener, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be part of our discussion. We look forward to having you join us again next month on another episode of Sound Discussion.
I had a nightmare once about doing the bowing wrong in Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet, like genuinely waking up in sweats because I was so worried about messing up and letting down the whole orchestra, like this stupid bowing.